world will never be the same facing the global threat. We have survived the hardest crisis in the history. The industry is abiding by the new rules, and these rules provide for the successful development. The events of the Fishery Forum will provide answers to the new challenges that the fishery is facing, as well as the aquaculture, which is the leader in producing fish products globally and in Russia. It is important to understand how the products make it to the consumers, what's happening at the logistics chain. A special discussion is devoted to the consumer market and how to make the fish products popular among the younger generations as well. Talking about the youth, we should say that what the fishery industry could provide as an employer. It is necessary to bring in talent, to attract talent into the industry and science. These and the other issues will be discussed at the business program of the Fishery Forum. Welcome to the fourth Global Fishery Forum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to welcome you to the fourth Global Fishery Forum and Seafood Expo. I am glad that you have joined us. I hope that the discussion will be both interesting and fruitful, and I would like to invite the participants. Mr. Cybulski, the governor of Arkhangelsk region. Mr. Kamil Dareks, development director of the MSC. Vladimir Rachmanin, Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Europe and Central Asia, UN-FAO. Mr. Alexei Buglak, President, Pollock Catchers Association. Andrei Yatskin, First Deputy Chairman of the Federation Council. Mr. Shestakov, Federal Agency for Fisheries. Mr. Jacob Vestergaard, Minister of Fisheries of the Faroe Islands, and Kjell Ingebrigtsen. I apologize for my pronunciation of the Norwegian name, Chairman of the Norwegian Fishermen Association. And today we will have Ms. Rechkina, the First Deputy President of the Rosselsbank. Okay, a few words on the procedure of the day. If you feel like talking from where you sit, you can do that, or you can use the rostrum. And I would like to give the floor to the Minister of Agriculture of the Russian Federation, Mr. Patrushev, for you to give us the general picture of what the fishery industry is facing in the year of the pandemic. Esteemed colleagues, dear participants of the plenary session, good afternoon to you. Allow me once again to welcome you to the fourth Global Fishery Forum. Today, we will discuss the most burning issues of the development of the fishery industry, which indeed is a part of the global market. And this industry plays an important role in the social and economic system of the countries. However, the pandemic has shown it once again that food security is very important, and one should take care of it in the day-to-day activity. And it's not only important for the individual countries, but globally. What is important is that the Russian fisheries industry is operating smoothly under the new condition, and there is a stability and it is underpinned by the special measures taken. There's a special quarantine lockdown measures introduced for the seafaring personnel. There is a growth rate of 14% of the aquaculture, and it was exceeded the 500,000 tons. And we expect that the water bioresources will be growing. As far as the fish processing is concerned, the sector has retained the trends for growth thanks to the commissioning of the new capacity. In the past 3 years, there are 20 onshore facilities has been commissioned, and 6 of these are large scales with the volume of processing of more than 1,000 tons. There are new vessels that have been commissioned that process fish at sea. We have increased their supplies by 300,000 tons. However, there were restrictions and limitations imposed by China, and we started looking for new markets. And the products were channeled to South Korea and the other countries of the Southeast Asia. Food and the food products are supplied to Mauritania and New Zealand. At the same time, we maintain dialogue with our Chinese partners. The Russian partners provided new measures to reduce the risk of coronavirus. As far as the expansion of the geography of export is concerned, in the past 4 years, we have opened 20 new markets for 23 new products, and we will continue with these efforts. I would like to draw your attention to improvement of the state support. Next year, the fishermen that are engaged in their activity in the remote areas will be provided subsidies for fuel. There are changes to be introduced into the tax code to provide incentives for high-value products. Subsidies will be provided for haulage of the products from the Far East regions. The projects are supported at the special economic zones of the accelerated development. Last week, President of the Russian Federation at the Eastern Economic Forum has declared about the incentive provided in the Kuril Islands, and I'm sure Mr. Shestakov will give you more details about that. The pandemic has tested the sustainable economic structures, and it emphasized the importance of the sustainable production, and the fishery industry is no exception. Our main benchmarks are, first, of course, is rejuvenating and introducing new capacity for new jobs, which will improve the quality of life in the region. Those regions where the fishery industry facilities are dominated. It is important to provide incentives for investments. At present, there are 5 vessels built as a result of the investment quotas. 33 more are coming. Altogether, 40% of the vessels in the Far East will be upgraded, and 80% in the north. Another important issue is environment, sustainable environment, and aquaculture development. The potential for aquaculture is quite high in Russia. Even today, a number of the enterprises meet the standards. However, many enterprises operate in an obsolete way. And colleagues, I would like to draw your attention to shift to the new technologies, and the Ministry of Agriculture will give you all the necessary support. Priority number 3 is the development of the industry science. And it is very important because of the climate agenda. Last year, the R&D and the scientific enterprises have conducted 900 expeditions to study habitats. 22 will have more surveys. We expect that the outcomes of these surveys, together with the scientific community, will study the climate change on the populations and develop the measures to mitigate the regulations both domestically and globally. Dear colleagues, today the fishery industry is developing along the lines of the global trends. However, the pandemic is introducing a lot of changes, disrupting the chain of custody, and our task to adapt to the new conditions and to strengthen the fishery industry. To do that, we will provide incentives for the investments and provide the state support. We count on the further dialogue with the fishing community, and this forum is a nice venue to exchange opinions, ideas, and technologies. Dear friends, I wish you fruitful work and mutually beneficial contracts. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry. And let's refer it to the our legislators, and we have a representative of the Federation Council, and we had challenges disclosed, but new markets and new prospects. What support do you think should be given to the fishery industry for it to bounce back after the pandemic? Thank you, and to be held responsible for all the legislators, I have taken my floor at the rostrum. Before answering the question, I would like to make my statement, and I have already stated my opinion at the opening, and what I saw at the Expo is very encouraging, and it stands to reason that we are having it because the Russian authorities have undertaken measures to make the fishery industry stronger. I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to have my talk at the forum. This venue is quite authoritative. It has gained prominence among the fishing community, and I am sure that pretty soon we will have an anniversary forum, and we will be making conclusions, and it will be very encouraging and exciting for the industry. Taking into account the marine resources, Russia is one of the largest producers and suppliers of the fish products. As it was noted by the Council of the Federation, the effects of the activities, food security, the development of the export potential, and the regional development. All these things make it possible to make the fish products accessible, improving the quality of life. The Minister of the Fishery Industry has stated already that the industry is demonstrating good dynamics against all the indicators, and the stress test of the pandemic was successful, and it is clear that the value chains and the supply chains, the chains of custody, are being recovered. And we got together not only talk about the success, but to talk about the issues, challenges. Then there are new challenges, both domestically and globally. And of course, the competition is growing at the international market. At that, the priorities is to upscale the industry, to improve the R&D potential, the upgrade of the fleet and equipment, and the Federation Council, the State Duma take these challenges into account, and we respond to the requests that are forwarded from the regions. We have received Murmansk and Arkhangelsk catchers associations, and they requested the special law to be enacted that would enable to process the fish at sea. And there is a law 338 that was enacted, and the Federation Council provides support to all the measures to replenish the fleet with mid and large tonnage ships. And the expo at the venue has got the products produced now. We monitor the investments to replenish the fleets, and the investments exceed 200 billion rubles. The issues of the development of the fishery industry are discussed at the joint chambers together with the government. Premier Mishustin with the Minister of the Fishery, joined the legislators to discuss it. The senators are visiting the fishing industry facility, and the representatives of the legislators can share their ideas about those visits. And I would like to emphasize the importance of international cooperation to prevent the so-called IUU, and the Council of Federation includes this issue of IUU into the agenda of the Federation Council, and we are inviting the international community for discussion, and we are ready to support the measures to prevent, to put a stop to the IUU globally. And the Russian Federation is taking part in the international regulations. We have made our contribution into the agreement of IUU in the central part of the North Ocean, and Russia has defended the role of the coastal states for the diversity, and our colleagues from the US, Canada, the EU supported the idea put forward by Russia. There is another idea on the protection framework of the states that make use the flag of convenience and held them liable for the IUU. And this particular issue will be discussed in the Senate, in the Federation Council. It is important to increase the culture of cooperation for utilizing the resources. The unfair competition and violation of the unsustainable development should be prevented. And both the executive authorities and the legislators will undertake measures to promote this approach along the interparliamentary channels. Through joint concerted efforts, we will make our contribution to address the challenges, and I am sure the current discussion will contribute to that. And I wish success to the work of the forum. Thank you, Andrei. Before giving floor to Ilya Vladimirovich, I would like to thank the Ministry of the Federal Agency for Fisheries for organizing the Fishery Forum. It is an indication that we are getting back to the normal life. But what will be new normalcy? Because we have heard about the new initiatives like Federal Law 338, which provides for the processing at sea, but the others are saying that onshore processing is more important. There are tax breaks in the Kuril Islands. Many of the industry are just asking, where should the investments be made into? So could you please enlighten us on it?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Stas, it's a very good question. And it is quite characteristic of our internal activity. And at the Eastern Economic Forum, we have been discussing it. And we've come to an important conclusion that we have to invest into the sea and into the coast as well, but we have to strike a balance there. And in general, I can say that the fishery industry in Russia is changing drastically, and it allowed us to be ready for the challenges that the pandemic has brought about. And if it came 2 years after that, we would not be experiencing any difficulties at all. We had to face some restrictions that were introduced by our partners in terms of logistics, but we managed to survive this period, though we faced some difficulties, but we shifted part of the cargo to Korea, and we opened new markets for our products, and the plants that have been already built in line with the quota system, it enabled us to manufacture the end products for primary markets, and the closure of China has become an ideal for us. But one of the representatives of the fishery industry said that without this ordeal, we would not be able to understand the importance of the quotas. But opening my speech, I'd like to say a few words about the global markets, what happened under the conditions of pandemic. If we talk about the global trends of the last year, the COVID pandemic led to supply disruptions and the decrease in the fishery outputs. According to FAO, the production of aquaculture has decreased for the first time, and the structure of consumption has changed, and a demand for fresh products and frozen products has decreased, and the drop has amounted almost to 90% according to some estimates, and there was a transformation of supplies, and lawn storage products were in higher demands, and consumers during their isolation and quarantine cooked their meals at home, and fishermen had to work for the storage facilities, and new trade ties have been established for almost all trade categories. And another aspect is also important, the safety measures, what I've mentioned in China, in the largest ports, the human contacts with the products have been minimized, and the demand has grown for refrigerator containers. It has grown by 4 to 5%, and in the upcoming years, the transportation of perishable goods will be done in specific containers, and we do understand that the shipping will be decreasing. And in this regard, for us, for the Russian Federation, it is important to build new infrastructure facilities, to build and to construct new refrigerator containers, and to increase the volume of container production. The decrease of export to China led to the drop of 14% in the output of pollock in Russia, and we can estimate this number in different ways, and we hope that we will be able to catch up with the former figures, but we do see the decrease in the profit for enterprises. Taken into consideration the successful output in salmon, about 5 million tons will be caught. The year is not over yet in the Far East, but our task is to come to 5.4 million tons by 2030, and Mr. Rahmanin probably will mention that. According to the estimates of FAO, we will have the largest increase of GDP in this category, but these estimates are provided based on the reforms that are undertaken and also the vessels that will be put to sea in future. And we are gradually diversifying our supplies, and the example of the exports to Japan has grown 2 times, 12% to the Netherlands, and 22 tons from zero to Nigeria. We are opening new markets this year. Among exporters, we have India, and in Ghana, Panama, and a number of other states. We can't say about large volumes of supply. It's too early to do that, but it means that we are expanding the geography of our supply. We have been talking about it for a very long period of time. We are diversifying the market. I'd like to emphasize the Pollock crisis. It confirmed the necessity to speed up the processing on the territory of the Russian Federation. We do understand it. We have to meet the domestic demand, and we have to adopt a more flexible approach on the global market. And the main task, the main goal under the conditions of pandemic here for us is the following. When we experience this crisis, we have to adjust rapidly with the different categories of products. It does not mean that we will build the fish processing capacities and we will be producing a fillet during the next 20 years. We will have to have the opportunity to manufacture different other types. Probably we will shift to some other processed goods, but it will be very important to have this flexibility. Without it, it will be quite difficult. And after we implement all these projects, we have estimated it, and 3.3 million tons will be processed, and we plan that by 2030 we will be able to increase the processing from 25% to 80%. To give an impetus to the infrastructure development, what has been already mentioned, we plan to distribute 20% of investment quotas in the Far East in the upcoming years, and it is quite clear that we will provide more details after the discussions with the businesses in Russia. The main manufacturing and production are accounted for by medium-sized and large companies, but small fishery is also very important. We have to pay special attention to it. The mechanism of the replenishment of low and medium tonnage vessels has been introduced, and at some quota-free facilities, and we are compensating and reimbursing 30% of the vessels that are being built. We will evaluate how efficient these measures are, but our goal is to use rationally all the resources of the seas. We primarily talk about the northern basin, about the Far East, but we should not forget about the Baltic Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea. Probably the fishery is not so large scale, but it has very important social and economic importance, and the replenishment of the facilities is to ensure the economic efficiency and its increase, but it will also help us to ensure the sustainable fishery and also strengthen the position of fishery of the Russian Federation in global context. It's quite relevant, and during the last year, it has become an engine of influence in the global agenda, and we have to take that into account when we talk about new projects and are working them out. During the last years, we have had a new successful global partnership in new resources and new research, and we would like to suggest that we should move forward in this direction, and we have to ensure our efficient cooperation at all the levels. Besides the development of the processing and ensuring the efficiency of the fishery complex, we have a look at expanding the geography of fisheries, and one of the main challenges is the krill catch development and also aquaculture development. And here we have huge potential to be unlocked for growth, and we know that aquaculture production around the world is more than the wild catch figures. In Russia it is still quite low. And also innovations into biotechnologies, we have to move further. We have to fully process all the productions and to come to the end products. Though the influence of the pandemic is still here, it is not over, but we support the opinions of those experts that the market will recover gradually, and the demand for fish will be supported by the growth of the population and healthy diet. And challenges that were brought about by the COVID and the disruption in supply led to the perception of fish as a valuable product and a source of protein, and this trend will still be preserved. I'd like to emphasize that fish farms have proved to be sustainable, and it proves that it is important from the point of view of economic efficiency. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Ilya Vasilievich. And I'd like to give the floor to Christian Tor Juliansen, Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture of Iceland. Iceland, on the one hand, is a large competitor on the fish market for Russia, but we have had a long history of good partnership with Iceland. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to attend the 2021 Global Fishery Forum and Seafood Expo Russia and participate in this plenary session with the topic Impact of the Pandemic, New Challenges for the Fisheries Sector. The COVID pandemic affects all our societies and economic sectors. It is highly important that we are fully aware of the effects it has on the fisheries sector and seafood markets and consider the best way forward. I'm sure we have all undertaken similar thinking in the past months as we try to analyze the situation and different aspects of the problems we are faced with. This includes identifying which problems are temporary and are resolved as we move beyond the pandemic, and the problems which are likely to stay. The most difficult problems are the ones we knew before, but got worse because of the pandemic. Another aspect is the different roles of governments and the sector itself. It is important to distinguish between the roles of governments and the fishery sector. Governments must manage the operative conditions and give support with the aim to leave sector as strong as possible once things become stable again. I would like to start by mentioning a few issues related to government operations. Monitoring, control and enforcement, MCS, has proved problematically during the pandemic. Interaction between inspectors and crew members are risky under these difficult circumstances. The problems that have arisen will cause us to revisit plans to shift our focus towards electronic means of MCS and an ever greater emphasis on a better targeted MCS utilizing risk assessment. This leads directly into the work of RFMOs and coastal states. The pandemic has led to virtual meetings, which have been useful as far as they go, and some issues can just as easily be dealt with through virtual meetings. However, other types of discussions will be firmly cemented as face-to-face fora. We have experienced that complex disagreements are not most effectively resolved in virtual gatherings. In addition to this, many international meetings have been cancelled, postponed, or have had more limited agendas. Consequently, we have been building up a big to-do list that we will have to start to address when we move beyond the pandemic. This will probably take some time. As for the sector itself, we have noticed that the main market issue caused by the pandemic seems to be changes in the consumption patterns. At the outset, there appeared to be something of a collapse in some markets when demand simply vanished almost overnight. However, creative minds of the sector came up with products which found their way to different markets. Some of the changes that the pandemic has caused will be resolved without the need for much targeted action when things return to normal. Others may require some interventions. Some changes may be for the better. We are therefore not faced with the simple situation of trying to go back to how things were. We must also look for the opportunities in the confusion. Government assistance has reduced the problems to some extent, and all the governments have adopted measures to help economies to get through the pandemic, fisheries sector included. This involves support measures for businesses as well as support measures for individuals. The pandemic has provided a textbook example of case where the government needs to step in during a time of emergency. The arrangements might be different, but every country has this tune. In this context, I would like to emphasize an important point. It is vital that these support measures are considered temporary, but do not become permanent subsidies. Temporary relief must not become long-term support, since that would limit the long-term flexibility and adaptiveness of the sector and undermines the long-term success of the sector and the people who rely on it. Sometimes, as a wise man said, sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The seafood sector will always react quickly to changes. The pandemic has underlined that. In fact, the Icelandic sector seemed to have navigated somewhat safely through the rough waters last year, with export value of seafood in 2020 roughly unchanged in Icelandic kronas from 2019, compared to about 75% decrease in export earnings in the tourist industry. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the public authorities must ensure it is well understood by the fisheries sector that we expect the future of the sector to be one where it stands firmly on its own 2 feet and where the pandemic has not resulted in increases in government support or micromanagement. Fisheries must be sustainable from both an environmental and economic perspective if they are to contribute to the well-being of our societies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And as you don't have your earphone with interpreter, let me thank you in English. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing with us your views.
Thank you very much, dear Minister, for sharing your opinion. Mr. Juliuson and Mr. Patrushev will have their mutual negotiations. Let's thank them for participating in the plenary session. Thank you for sharing your viewpoint and your stand. Thank you very much. And we continue and we'll go to the Faroe Island.
So let us move to Faroe Islands, and statistically we can see that Faroe Islands...
Should I go on in English so you understand? your islands are like in top 3 countries importing in Russia. How do you manage to do that, and what prospects do you see in Russian-foreign relations in fishery? Фарерские острова в топ-3 стран, которые импортируют рыбную продукцию в Россию.
Faroe Islands always have a very good relationship with Russia. We are collaborating in fisheries for many, many years, and I see Russia as our friends, our near companies, near friends when we discuss fishery matters, and I see further more cooperation with Russia, also on trade, all the trade markets. So Russia is a very good partner for our fish products and a very good partner in the for the fishery management. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I wish to extend my thanks to Mr. Ilya Shestakov and the Federal Agency for Fisheries for inviting me to St. Petersburg. I'm also pleased to be able to attend this event in person, especially after this long period of social distancing. I believe events like this can provide us with signs that life and business will return to normal again. However, a new normal will probably not be the same as we knew it, but in crises like this pandemic, we learn and we adapt to the new realities in business and in life. When we first learned about COVID-19, we thought that it may not affect the Faroe Islands, not because we were already immune, but because often the Faroe Islands are in many ways remote, isolated, and difficult to reach. But we have learned that today the world is more connected than ever, and COVID-19 has also reached the Faroe. Since the first cases of COVID-19 in March 2020, we have seen a number of surges bring up the number of COVID cases. But every time there has been a surge, the health authorities have quickly and effectively brought the situation back under control by using extensive testing, contact tracing, and by issuing public guidelines to restrict social events and other gatherings. Being a small country has some benefits in terms of managing COVID outbreak. This has meant that domestic life has almost continued as normal, partly because of the relatively large testing capacity, but especially because of the people's acceptance of the government's guidelines. However, the global effects of the pandemic still remain very evident for Faroese businesses. Faroese export largely consists the fishing industry and the salmon farming industry. In recent years, the tourism industry has also become an important part of the Faroese economy. But it's probably needless to say that the tourism industry has been hard hit because of the international travel restrictions. Fortunately, Faroese people have traveled more in their own country than even before, and this has compensated many in the travel industry for otherwise lost income. In a similar way, the fishing industry has been resilient during the pandemic through diversification of their products and markets. When it comes to fishery industry, COVID-19 has not affected the productivity very much. The products were already used to strict demands. The producers were already used to strict demands regarding health and sanitation, and it was quite easy for them to adjust to new requirements and to implement new procedures to limit the risk of infection. Fisheries at sea have continued on a normal level, but the export of fish is decreased. This has led to some logistical challenges, both in terms of transporting fish to the buyers and in terms of storage space. The biggest effect on the faroe fish export is that the traditional demand from catering industries, especially restaurants in Southern Europe and the sushi market in America and Asia, has declined dramatically. For those exporting mainly to the restaurants and catering industry, it was very important to be able to change production quickly. Their response was to shift their production towards the growing demand from supermarkets. However, this production generates low profits, but at the very least, our production has not stopped. And we have not seen a significant rise in unemployment figures. But there have also been some positive effects, of course. Some companies have been able to optimize production costs, and the drop in oil price in 2020 did also benefit the fishing industry. It is still too early to say that the fishing industry has recovered from the pandemic or adapted to a new reality, but I sense an increased optimism in the industry now. As a fishery nation, we also have a responsibility to provide assistance to foreign fishing vessels that may need help. There have been some critical cases of COVID-19 where medical support from Faroes has been required on board foreign fishing vessels. In this regard, I wish to stress that it is our priority that foreign vessels and their crew can safely operate in our water, knowing that we will provide them with the appropriate assistance wherever it is needed. If a lesson is to be learned from this pandemic, I believe it is the importance of being able to diversify production to accommodate the market where the demand is. Good trade relations and access to various markets have been key to secure the resilience of Faroese fishing sector. And on this note, I wish to express my sincerest gratitude for the kind and beautiful relation between the Faroe Islands and the Russian Federation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vladimir Olegovich, it's a question for you. Mr. Westergaard has just stated, and that's the situation not only at the Faroe Islands. On one hand, the catch is growing, the production is growing. On the other hand, there are issues with logistics. The produce doesn't make it to the consumers, and there is a new kind of disbalance at the fishing market. What will happen with that kind of disbalance? Will it still be growing or what? Thanks for the question, and thanks for the opportunity to have my say. Esteemed Andrei Vasilyevich and Mr. Shostakov, Ilya, dear colleagues, friends, dear participants of the forum, it's a great honor and a pleasure at the same time to take part in this happening. And I am happy to present Food and Agricultural Organization, and I would like to pass my best regards from our Director General, Mr. Vanderbuur, and of course I will share my impression from the forum and expo. And it's not just paying compliment to you, but it's a true fact of life, because the exposition that is being happening over here is quite impressive, both by content and by the scale. And we can learn a lot from the expo, and I would like to congratulate you and the idea to unite the exposition where we see the results with the forum, where the issues could be discussed and where we can give answers to the question is a good practice. And I'm absolutely happy that it's a tradition and it is supported by the Ministry of Fishery Industry in Russia. Of course, fish is one of the biggest commodity. Fishery and aquaculture is creating jobs, and it supports livelihood of millions of people. And we've been noting that fishery is supposed to be instrumental in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals for the period till 2030. Much depends on how the situation will be in the fishery industry globally. To answer your question, Stanislav, still coming to it, and I will answer it, I must say that despite the success, and our organization is responsible for work against hunger, for food security, and despite the success in pre-COVID years to overcome hunger, the pandemic set us back in this good course. The number of the hungry has grown by 161 million people, and it is 811 million. And of course, it cannot be tolerated in our world. We should work hand in hand. Every 1 in 10 people are suffering from hunger, and the others are suffering from the lack of vitamins or from excessive weight. And 1 billion cannot afford a well-balanced nutrition. That's the background that we're working against. So to overcome hunger by 2030, concerted efforts are needed, and we rely much hope on the contribution that could be made by the fishing industry. FAO is estimating that the fish products will be growing, but 11.2 and 1.2, and aquaculture 2% by 2027. The products of aquaculture could exceed the catch of the fish. The fish consumption by 2030 will be 21 and 2 kgs versus 20 kgs now. It is also important because we are fighting hunger against adapting to the climate change and against the attempts to stop climate change. We are fighting for the preservation of biodiversity, and the fishery industry could be quite helpful because it is much cost intensive to overcome the climate change. And the food security is very important, and FAO is in charge, are leading the fight. The fishery industry is much affected, and I've taken the report of FAO. You can get hold of it at our stand, and thank you for accommodating the stand. The fishery industry was hard hit more than the others. And that's why I'm so overjoyed to see the demonstration of the achievements that the Russian Federation is showing. And one of the biggest difficulties was the disruption of the chains, of the supply chain, chains of custody, value chains. And this is the issue that affects not only such large, expansive countries as Russia, but small fishing industries, and the catches stop fishing, and we have studied the dynamics and how to recover the production, how to give a chance to keep catching and keep working with the aquaculture. FAO has set up a target group to coordinate the efforts of the member states to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. We have provided the analytics, the intelligence. We've been monitoring the situation, providing the technical support to the individual facilities and countries, and we have been developing the joint measures together with our partners. The Russian Federation is a reliable partner of the FAO in this work. Its fishery industry provides products for not only the population of Russia, but exporting it to other countries. Russia is a leading player in the global fishery industry. Mr. Shostakov has been talking about the situation and prospects of the development of the fishery industry in Russia. And the prospects are realistic, and the prospects are bright, and we share these prospects and the forecast. And I would like to refer to what Mr. Patrushev said about the R&D, and FAO platform is accessible to you. Please take it to FAO platform, and we will be prepared to share it as best practices globally. And supporting the agreement on measures to prevent illegitimate fishing, we laud and applaud the efforts taken in Russia, and thanks to the legislators of supporting this important global initiative. There was a reference made to trade in fish, and Stanislav, that's the question that Stanislav, the moderator, asked. And we should have a multilateral approach, and that's the idea I've been playing with. Why not invite the leading body of FAO on trade and have a session, a workshop jointly, and with your forum? It could be held in 2023, and we can discuss this issue. Of course, 2023 is still 2 years away, but we can start the groundwork to prepare it. In conclusion, once again, I would like to express my gratitude to the Federal Agency on Fisheries for the opportunity given to us to present the FAO materials at the stands, for the multiple meetings at the margins of the forum, which are very important indeed, and for the opportunity to have 3 sessions under the auspices of FAO to consider the agenda of the forum issues. Thanks once again. It's a great pleasure for me. Thank you.
Спасибо вам большое. Но я хотел бы все-таки про дисбалансы, про дисбалансы продолжить говорить. Мистер Дерекс, вот морской попечительский совет буквально накануне
on the eve of our happening, sometime before the forums, has certified the new fishing grounds. Has certified the new fishing grounds at Kamchatka. And many know what the issues are the industry at Kamchatka is facing because of the difficulties of selling pollock to China. That kind of disruptions and gaps, how long do they last? So you have certified the new fishing grounds, but should they start catching fish there or not?
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to answer his question first, but not before I first say a big thanks to the organizers to invite the Marine Stewardship Council here today. It's great to be back, and so, Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to reflect on the global demand for sustainable seafood, and I will come back to your question on Alaska or Russian pollock and how that certification of pollock in the global market is important, and also for East Kamchatka. So over the 5 minutes or so that I have, I'll first reflect and zoom out on the global situation, where we see that the fundamentals have not materially changed despite the COVID pandemic. If my presentation can come back, then I hope you can see it as well. Is my presentation there? Oh, I'm now much further than I thought I was. There we are. Okay, so as I said, the global fundamentals that we as MSC operate in and the global seafood industry operates in is still pretty much there. 18 months ago, some 2.4 billion people on the planet were dependent on the seafood industry as their prime source of protein, and that hasn't fundamentally changed. Some 60 million people around the globe are dependent on fishing and aquaculture operations as their prime source of income. And if you add other services and industries in the supply chain, boat building, net making, financing, science, perhaps up to 500 million people around the globe depend on the seafood industry. And that is all underpinned by natural resources and healthy ecosystems that provide these jobs and these economic opportunities. Another reality that unfortunately hasn't changed very much over the past 18 months is this graph that you see here, which is something I took from the Food and Agriculture Organization State of Aquaculture and Fisheries report that they published in June of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. And it shows the number of fish stocks for which they receive data that are classified as either overfished, fully exploited, or overexploited. And the yellow part in this graph shows the proportion of stocks that is considered to be in an overfished state. And that has grown to 34%. And the trend, as we can see, is not good. That hasn't changed, but it does need to change. We are in a world where we're heading towards perhaps 10 billion people in 2050, and we simply need to use the resources that we have more smartly. Now, the good news is there are solutions for that. We know where we want to go. We have the Global Sustainable Development Goals ratified by 193 states in end 2015. And Sustainable Development Goal number 14 specifically relates to life below the water, where states committed themselves to rebuild stocks to levels where maximum sustainable yield can be produced, to eradicate illegal, unregulated fishing, and to ensure harmful subsidies are ended. The United Nations also said that collaboration is fundamental between public sectors that are the natural stewards of the resources. They are setting the harvest control rules, they are issuing the licenses, they do control the fisheries. But it's important to collaborate with science, with the private sector, and it recognized that international, global, credible certification systems can help governments and private sector to demonstrate progress against the goals. And MSC was specifically mentioned as an example in relation to SDG 14. Now, coming back to COVID-19 then, in this context of a transition that needs to happen, it definitely did create a lot of disruption. We've heard about whole markets falling away, specifically the food service market where fresh seafood was consumed. It did close overnight. Restaurants, hotel chains, the airline industry, events, it fell away, and it required fisheries around the world to be very resourceful in changing how they processed and what products they would produce and export. We've heard about the logistical challenges and the additional border controls and the times that that takes and the closure of the Chinese market. It is a tremendous challenge for the logistical challenge for the fishing industry. But in many places, we've nevertheless seen very strong, resilient answers and creative minds that came up with solutions and managed to find markets for their seafood. As MSC, in the pandemic, we did a global research amongst consumers, how they think about seafood and sustainability, how they think about the eco-label. Actually, sustainability is more at the forefront of consumers' minds. It's more important than ever in our poll. The recognition of the label has gone up between 2018 and 2020. And markets, retail markets, they are actually demanding more food and seafood as well. And that creates new opportunities for some seafood producers. So as MSC, many of the fisheries in the world that work with our program, now some 15% of the global fisheries meets our standard, they've actually also found solutions despite the challenges that the COVID pandemic confronted them with. Specifically in Russia, maybe also against all the odds in this difficult time, we have seen the fastest growth across all countries. This graph shows the number of units of certification in the MSC program in Russia over time. And you see in 2020 and 2021, the relative and absolute growth has been astounding. Fisheries for cold water prawns in the Barents Sea, for crabs in the Barents Sea, Pacific cod, halibut in the Far East, Greenland halibut in the Barents Sea, and a whole string of salmon and pollock fisheries now meet the MSC standard, bringing the proportion of wild catch from Russia in the MSC program to 45%. And that's really testament to a strong scientific basis for the management of fisheries in Russia, solid controls, and overall it's a real achievement and demonstration that Russia is making incredible progress to be compliant fully with the aspirations of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I really want to congratulate all the stakeholders with that. Coming back specifically to the East Kamchatka question, why is now more pollock than ever certified in Russia? I think it does relate to an overall market demand for seafood sustainability documentation. The MSC provides a solution for that. Russia has a very well-organized industry that said together we can actually demonstrate we meet the standard and cater to the demand for sustainability documentation, and we can be attractive for international markets relative to the competition from other countries because we have a good management system. So I think that's the fundamental driver here. And on that note, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Спасибо вам большое.
Mr. Ingebrigtsen, I've had a look at the statistics, and I see that in Norway, in spite of all the difficulties, last year was one of the record high years, and this August has also set a record indicator. I understand that you have the report that you have prepared for this plenary session, but we would like to understand your vision, this growth of the catch. Do you face some challenges and problems with the output on the market, and how do you resolve those issues? And do you see a significant problem there in the logistics? I'd like to specify that it is about logistical problems.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would say that working in the fisheries industry is working with the future. We can look forward, and we know, all of us, that the world's population are growing, and all of them need food. I will come back to your question during my speech. First of all, dear ministers, guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to attend this session. It's a great pleasure to be here in beautiful St. Petersburg. The COVID pandemic has impacted the fisheries industry in many ways. Both our advantage is that we are used to dramatic changes. Changes in weather, in quotas, in regulations, and in the markets, and all part of every day in the fisheries industries. That is why we have been able to adapt quickly and find new solutions. Since the start of the pandemic, we have had many different challenges. Supply chains, disruption on a large scale, delay in shipbuilding, maintenance and repairs. We have reduced shipping capacity and container shortage with big price hikes and long delays. We see falling prices for many products, and as an example, the price of cod was reduced with around 30% from March 2020 to March 21. Other products were hit even harder, as hotels and restaurants closed down all over the world. Difficulties with crew changes and lack of specialized workers because of closing borders and COVID protocols, uncertainty of food safety. So, all parts of the fisheries industry has been hit by the pandemic. But even with very demanding circumstances, we have been able to harvest and produce seafood almost as usual. People need to eat, also during a pandemic. As countries went into lockdown and restaurants closed, the seafood demand was still strong, but unpredictable. The demand of frozen products has been soaring, and the fishermen have been able to meet the demand. We are still in a pandemic. We have learned many lessons, and we're still adapting to new conditions. From our experience, one of the key learning points is that the quick communication and short lines of decision-making have been extremely important. Daily brief and exchange of information has been necessary to solve the different challenges we have. The Norwegian Fishermen Association have worked closely with the government and other organizations, monitoring the situation and discussing different measures. This has helped us keeping the business running. As for international cooperation and close border have been the biggest obstacle. Many issues have been discussed and solved on digital platforms the last year and a half. But to have a good international cooperation, it is very important that we can meet in person. This is my first trip to Russia with almost 2 years, and it feels very good to be back. Physically meeting are important and continue the mutual development within fisheries. So what about the new normal after the pandemic? For sure, we have to confirm that the seafood industry is both flexible and innovating. I am sure that the industry will handle the new challenges, and I am hopeful that the pandemic has increasing the demand for healthy seafood around the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, but I'd like to find out about the disbalance. Sorry, I'm getting back to this topic. Vladimir, probably you can comment on that. We'd like to understand your vision. How long will the situation be like this, like we see now, with the fishermen, the exports to China? It has become more complicated, to put it mildly, and we have to think how we should rechannel the fish. What has to be done in terms of logistics? Do we have to invest into containers for shipbuilders? Do they have to invest into container transportation? Or in 6 months, the containers will be quite affordable and not very expensive. Well, I frankly hope that our industry and our sector has found and has adopted a new approach due to the situation with the pandemic and the disruption in the export to China, and we will not go back to the old rail, so to say, if China opens up. But we ask ourselves a question, this sector, why our partners and colleagues have introduced such strict restrictions, because our feedstock was used there to build a sector of processing industry, and now they face this shortage of the feedstock, and it is a serious loss for them, and there are different viewpoints why they have done it, for which reason, and probably they are looking for 100,000 tons of pollock, and and to get new conditions, new terms from us. But I hope that the current situation will remain like this, and it will give us positive results, and it will mean that we have chosen the right policy working with this end market. Yesterday we had a meeting with our Norwegian colleagues, and they depend on European markets. In Poland, they have processing capacity, and it would be great to put forward this idea where you catch the fish, it is better to process it right there, and it will give this country an added value. And this pandemic will provide this direction for the development of the sector and the industry, and in spite of the complicated conditions, it will provide some positive results as well. Mr. Ingebrigtsen, would you like to respond to that? Is it possible to process it there? Because we are at the crossroads in Russia. What do we have to invest into? Recently, an agreement has been signed to expand logistics at the Eastern Economic Forum for shipping the fish and the seafood for transportation. Will we need that? 52 billion. Will we have to invest it? Will we have to ship the fish or process it right there?
Yes, I think it's very necessary for you to invest in this processing industry. And we have the same time of discussion in Norway. We need to process more inside Norway. And as I said in my speech, that is fisheries are the future. And the world need food. And if we have good processing industry, it will be a good investment. And of course, you need to transport the fish. Then we had the same type of discussion in Norway, but container is a very good way to transport it. Yes, I think.
Yes, but containers have become more expensive, like an increase of 7 times.
7 times more expensive.
Yes, but it's very necessary for us to keep the quality on the fish. And if we can keep it, for instance, frozen, forward into to the industry, they come near the industry, you will manage to keep the quality of the fish, and that's very necessary for the market. And the market is so on that you have to work with it every day. You have to speak with them, what they want, and so on. So it's a daily work.
Let's invite to come onto the stage a person who makes the decision what to invest into. Rosselschossbank has been investing a lot into agriculture in general, into fishery as well. Ms. Irina Zhachkina, first deputy chairman of the board. So what would you like to invest into? What would you like to purchase? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. When we start speaking about investments, you understand that you have to talk to the banks, and as Ilya Vasilievich has mentioned, and other colleagues as well, we as Rosselschossbank, we have a good expertise. We have been working for a long period of time with clients from agriculture and the fishery. We quite positively view the development of the fishery complex, and for us, we identify the prospects of investment for the future future. The bank is thinking about the return of investment. It is the most well-balanced approach for any investor, and risks when we estimate a project in the conservative way. So we are the most conservative participants of any process, and we adopt more conservative approach than any investor, and we see the following prospects and the growth of consumption in Russia and around the world, and the prospects of investing into certain areas, processing that has been mentioned a lot at the plenary session, both on the coast and at sea, the development of logistic infrastructure, what has been mentioned about the port facilities and containers, the production of aquaculture that is growing faster than any other sectors and areas. Taking into consideration the following fact, I will talk a little bit more about aquaculture later, and also building the fleet as an example of the cooperation that we used to have with China to 2020, exports from China, and we exported non-processed product, and our appetite for investment in processing in order to retain the margin and to increase the profitability for Russian manufacturers, about 70 billion rubles. According to our investment, we are ready to increase up to 80% of the catch into the increase of processing facilities. First of all, it is the production and manufacturing of fillet and ready-made products. Also, when we talk about the development of aquaculture, we see a disbalance in the consumption of fish, 6 kilos from Buryatia, and a lot more in other regions, and uneven consumption that we see is linked to the characteristics of logistics and the investment into logistics infrastructures, cold capacities and special fleet, and the appetite for this investment about 80 billion rubles.
So, another territorial disbalance. It's about the consumption of disbalance of consumption that it was mentioned, and one of the drivers of the growth of consumption are the produce of aquaculture. We welcome the growth rate that we witness in aquaculture industry. It is 14%, as it was mentioned, though the fish output growth is between 2 and 3%. Another advantage of aquaculture are economical versus the other sectors of agriculture, like poultry or fish, and 1.5 kgs of forage gives 1.5 of fish, and in poultry it is 2 kgs of feed produce 1 kg of poultry, and in cattle the ratio is 6. So economically, aquaculture with less investments could provide higher output, and it calls for less production capacity because the conversion ratio, feed conversion ratio is higher, and 60 billion rubles are expected to be invested into aquaculture in the near future till 2025. In the next 5 years, the demand for investment in the fishery are 50 billion rubles, and Rossельхозbank will be an active player to support the projects of the Russian business, and consequently, the classical instruments of the banks will be used. And that's why I'm thankful to the colleagues for giving me a chance to speak at the forum and outline that we believe in the prospects. And let's now give floor to the region where the aquaculture is developing vigorously. In Arkhangelsk region, despite there is a coastal area, the aquaculture is developing. So we are both farming and catching. So how do you view the prospects of the fishery industry, and where do you place an emphasis on when thinking about the strategical development of the region? Thanks, Stanislavs, and I will use my microphone from this seat and to answer the question. All the reports were highly professional, related to the fishery industry, and I am from the administration. I would like to thank the Rosrybolovstva Federal Agency and the Ministry for the chance for this event to materialize, because it was postponed, put forward repeatedly, and talking about the development. And I meant to thank for the unusual format of the hosting the event, because the virtual to remote conference is a more accustomed format. Physically here we can have a discussion and talk about our opportunities. And Arkhangelsk this year has staged a stand over here. Traditionally we have one stand for all the facilities. If you allow a few words on the impact of the pandemic, that's the subject matter of our plenary session. The fishing industry for Arkhangelsk is a part of the cultural code. It is a part of the regional identity and self-perception. The Pomor people have been engaged in fishing, being the carriers of the fishing technologies. So fishing is heart and blood of the Pomor citizens. So that's why it is important for us, not from the point of economy, but part of the identity, as I have said. In the past year, despite the pandemic, we have quite good results. More than 180 entities are involved in the industry. 16 are oceanic facility. One of the trawlers was in the Barents Sea, and the Arkhangelsk trawler fleet is doing well. More than 3,000 tons have been caught. Another trawler will go out to the deep in November. And of course, the decisions were taken earlier, but these are the results of the operation in the pandemic year. And there is a processing facility in Arkhangelsk that started operations in 2020 as part of the investments quota mechanism. And today, the availability of the processing facilities onshore, though they are not competing with the others, are good. And this particular facility is operating at 100% of its design capacity. You're welcome to visit it. Another risk that we have faced, there were pandemic limitations, and we have been developing the human resources strategy, and we have registered the shortage of the highly qualified human resources, because the qualifications in the industry are getting higher. And we realized that if one person is infected aboard the ship, it calls for the replacement, substitution of the whole crew. And that's why we have taken a decision, which was pending. It's about the Fishery College in Arkhangelsk. I would like to thank the Ministry of Education and Science that have supported us. And this particular college was on the brink of closure, but the pandemic and understanding that we are facing the shortage of human resources encouraged us to take a decision to retain it and include it into the Federal Arctic University. We have allocated first 50 million rubles to fund it. And at the moment, it is a vocational school, but we have taken a decision already to turn it into the higher school of fishing and technologies. And the license will be acquired, and it will be a higher educational establishment to train staff and develop capacity for the fishery industry. And so please look into it, and I would like the Ministry of I would like to request the Federal Agency for Fishery to rely upon it to train personnel. And it's good, and thanks that the northern filial of VNIRO, it is the R&D Institute of the fishery industry, and it is the basic for the Arctic studies. And we count on all these factors in unison. We have a cluster, the Arctic fishery cluster, and there is a road map adopted till the period of 2025. One will be the repair and maintenance center, and in the Arkhangelsk port, and we will keep developing the competencies. Another, besides the repair and maintenance, it is harvesting the marine mammals, and we are cooperating with the Norwegian colleagues, and on the 27th of September we will have a scientific conference. And another one is developing pasture aquaculture. A few pieces of statistics. In 2017 was 100,000 tons, and we expect 270,000 tons of products. And we are supporting the whole range of aquaculture projects, and we expect there'll be more people coming into the industry. Thanks, Mr. Governor. And we are aware that you will have to have a meeting. We can excuse me, and thanks for taking part in the plenary session, and we will continue. I would like to thank you. I would like to thank the participants of the plenary session. All the talks were interesting, and it gives food for thought for future cooperation. And I wish you success, and I wish the forum and Expo will keep developing. And let us continue. Alexei, the buzzword Pollock was mentioned several times. I would like to have a vision of what will be happening, and I know that you are debating the issue in the industry and trying to forecast, to predict where should the investments go, whether it is offshore or onshore. And of course, if it is done at the sea, the profitability would be higher. What will happen with the China market? Will the China be open, or whether you will still have to work as you're doing now using containers. So what will be the new normalcy next year? Thanks, Stanislav. Good afternoon, dear participants. Any discussion about fish, one way or another, ends or starts with the pollock. I thought it ends with sauna or bath. No, not that. Let me give you a few figures on pollock, because looks like we are running out of time. It's the export from Russia by 80%, and it's 4 times over, taking it to China. And the supplies are very slow. It's not only refrigerated containers, and the new coronavirus logistics has increased the logistics expenses to China by 2.5 times. And logistics expenses to Europe has increased by 6 or 7 times, and that's why the profits are lost. The enterprises are looking for new markets, and a lot of pollock is consumed domestically, and the processing facilities are producing in depth, and that's why the in-depth processing has grown by 34%. We estimate that the losses of the pollock sector has lost as a result of the prices loss and the excessive additional logistics costs and anti-COVID measures are 260 million USD, quite big. So it is obvious that the crisis will change the pollock landscape in the industry, and not all the Chinese processing industry enterprises survive, especially it is SME. They will have to go elsewhere, and the pollock will go to the southeast, to the other nations of Southeast Asia, where the labor is still cheap. What about us? There will be new vessels with at-sea processing, new processing facility on shore, which will be able to handle 40% of pollock, and there are prospects of a 50 by 50 ratio, 50 processed at sea and 50 onshore. And these two segments will complement one another. Processing at sea will make it possible to capitalize on the investments, and the processing at shore will be the center of attraction for the development of the agriculture, refrigerating depots and refrigerated storage, and it would make it possible to have more output that cannot be produced at sea. When do you think the decision will be taken on investment quotas? The final decision will be when the president signs the law. But I think after the elections into the State Duma, the legislators will come up with the initiative. What's your final proposal? Because I think it's up to your final proposals. We have been putting it out. We have been stating that it is necessary to invest both into the vessels, ships, and onshore facilities, so we will support both, and it refers to the Far East, and I think we will achieve the 80% renewal of the facilities in the Arctic, in the north, and we should develop the Far East infrastructure as well. It's one of the priorities, and Alexei has come up with an interesting word combination, like the word combination coronavirus logistics. It's a new word that is coiled. Everything is coronavirus related. Let's talk about coronavirus money. Let's invite Vladimir Sedov from Sberbank. Will you please you are given the floor. You can make use the rostrum. Well, what about you? How would you invest your money? Not your money, but Sberbank, of course. Thanks. Yes, we are interested in taking part in that kind of discussion. We have invested 250 billion rubles, both into the shipbuilding and processing facilities, and we'll be following the logics of our investors. If the priority is given to the shipbuilding, that's what we will be doing. If the priority is given to the processing facilities, we will do that. Of course, the profitability rates in the fishing are quite high, but there are certain risks that the investment projects are facing. It stands to reason that the bulk of the shipbuilding faces delay. It, of course, endanger the investments scheme that was made. In 2020, we viewed this program as a multi-billion investment projects, but using the money in between 2017 and 2019 resulted in the delays with the projects.
But the good news is that our shipbuilders, manufacturers are becoming more and more professional. And we have a series of new vessels that are being currently built. And it will be a serial manufacturing, and it will help us make progress. And I'm quite confident that in future we will see the redistribution of quotas and the subsequent transformation, and it will help us to renew the fleet both in other regions and in the Far East. And we are quite positive about the investment appeal, and we will continue our full-scale funding into those two areas. Thank you very much. And summing up our discussion, I'd like to ask a question to Ilya Vasilievich, the concluding question. So we spoke about coronavirus logistics, coronavirus breeding, coronavirus fishing. So what do you think in 2022? Will we fully adapt to this new normal, and this is the way we will live, or we will still go back to the old style of living? I can't say in general, but as for the fishery industry, I think we have adjusted, we have adapted to these conditions, and I think that the most complicated times are over. 2022 will be easier, and we will adjust to any small changes that will probably happen. So together with the representatives of the banking industry, we are quite optimistic about the development of the fishery industry. It is nice to do that together with the bankers. Thank you, dear ladies and gentlemen, for joining our plenary session. I'd like to thank the speakers for expressing their viewpoints about the fishery complex. Thank you very much again.